The generator ran on a schedule my father had set with a grease pencil on the side of the fuel tank. And the man on the radio knew that schedule better than I did. That was the first thing that made my hands go cold. Not the static, not the voice, but the fact that he waited until 6:04 to speak, 4 minutes after we powered up the shortwave, as if he'd been sitting in the dark, counting down to the exact moment we'd be listening. He didn't ask if anyone was there. He said, "You keep the second gate chained but not locked. That's a mistake, but it's a mistake I can work with." And then he told me he could save all of us, every person behind our walls, if I would open the gate for just one man. I want to tell this the way it happened, in the order it happened. Because the order is the only thing I still trust. Memory rearranges itself to make you the hero or the fool. And I don't want to be either. I want to be accurate. So I'll start with the walls and the well and the 11 people I was responsible for. And I'll get to the voice when the story gets to the voice. My name doesn't matter much anymore, but the place does. We called it the Dramer plant, though it hadn't drayed or planted anything in 40 years. It was a water treatment station on the edge of a county that stopped mattering to the state a long time before the sickness came. My father bought the deed at a tax auction when I was 9 because the price was insulting. And the land came with a working artesian well and 3 concrete buildings with walls thick enough to survive a war that never came to us the way he expected. He was not a man who believed the world was ending. He was a man who believed the world had already ended somewhere out of sight, and the rest of us were just late finding out. There's a difference, and the difference is patience. He never panicked. He just prepared, quietly, for decades, the way other men tend to garden or repair a boat. I remember the first time he took me through the buildings. I was small enough that the pump house ceiling seemed impossibly high, and he walked me from valve to valve with a flashlight, naming each one, making me repeat the names back. I thought it was a game. He knew it wasn't. He'd stop at a rusted wheel handle and say, "This one. If the pressure ever climbs and the gauge on the wall goes past the red mark, you close this one first and then this one. And you never close them in the other order, because the other order will crack the manifold, and then you've got no water at all." I nodded the way children nod, and forgot it the moment we left the room. And it took the end of the world to teach me how much of him I'd let evaporate out of my head, simply because I'd assumed he'd always be there to remember it for me. When the roads closed, and they closed in stages, first the interstate on-ramps, then the county highway, then the little farm road that ran past our fence line, my father was already dead. He'd been dead 2 years by then, of something ordinary and slow, a thing that had nothing to do with the sickness that came later. I have thought many times that he would have handled all of it better than I did. He knew the systems. He knew which valves to close in what order so the well didn't foul. He knew how to make the radio reach past the ridge. I only knew the parts he'd shown me, and I'd only half listened, the way you half listen to a parent when you were 24, and certain that the important part of your life is happening somewhere else. There were 11 of us at Dramer by the time the man on the radio started talking. Let me tell you who. Because they aren't a group, they're people. And the difference is the whole story. There was Marguerite, who was 71 and had been my father's neighbor for 30 years, and had come to us on the second week with a suitcase of seed packets and a hunting rifle she'd never once fired. She cooked. She cooked constantly, not because we were hungry, but because cooking was the only thing that stopped her hands from shaking. And I learned early that the smell of onions in the morning meant Marguerite had woken up scared and was managing it the only way she knew. She had a way of standing at the stove with her back to the room that told you she was listening to every word, said behind her, while pretending to listen to none of it. She'd buried a husband, and before that, a son. and she carried her griefs the way some old people do. Folded small and put away, brought out only when they were useful to somebody else's pain. She told me once, stirring a pot, that grief was a tool if you let it cool down enough to handle. I didn't understand her then. I understand her now. There was Devlin, who'd been a lineman for the power company and could fix anything with a motor and a grudge, and who drank too much when he could find it and grew mean and quiet when he couldn't. He had a son somewhere, a grown son in another state, and he never talked about him except once, drunk, when he told me the boy had stopped taking his calls a year before any of this. Devlin fixed our generator 4 separate times. The first time, it was a fuel line. The second time, it was the starter. The third time, he couldn't tell me what it was. Just crouched over it in the cold for 2 hours with his sleeves rolled up and his breath fogging, muttering, until the thing coughed and caught. And he stood up and wiped his hands and wouldn't take the thanks anybody offered. Devlin also, I would learn, was the kind of man who did arithmetic in his head about how much longer the fuel would last with 11 mouths versus with fewer. I didn't hold it against him as much as maybe I should have. Fear does that math on its own. The sin is saying the number out loud. There was the Okonkwo family, Emmanuel, his wife Priya, and their 2 kids, a boy of 9 named Sam and a girl of 6 named Ada. Emmanuel had been a pharmacist. Priya had been a school teacher. They arrived at our gate in a car that was overheating and out of gas, having driven past a dozen safer-looking places, because Emmanuel said he'd read somewhere that water infrastructure sites were the last to be looted. He was right, as it turned out, though for the wrong reasons. Their daughter Ada asked the same question every night for a month. Is my school still there? And every night, one of us gave her a different answer, and none of us gave her the true one, which was that we didn't know and probably never would. Emmanuel was the mildest man I've ever met, mild in a way that I mistook at first for weakness, and later understood was a kind of iron. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. When Emmanuel decided a thing was wrong, he simply stood in front of it, physically, with his own body, and made you go through him to reach it. And there was something in the quiet of it that stopped people the way shouting never could. There was Rennie, 19, who'd shown up alone on a bicycle with a backpack full of energy bars and a phone he still charged every day, even though it had shown no signal in 6 weeks. He charged it because, he said, if it comes back on, I want to be ready. He never said ready for what. I think he was waiting for a message from someone. We were all, in our own ways, waiting for a message from someone. That's important. Remember that when I get to the voice. Rennie had a mind that took things apart and put them back together better than they'd started. And he was the only one of us young enough to still believe the situation was a puzzle rather than a sentence. And that belief made him useful in ways the rest of us had lost the capacity for. There was Priya's brother, Hollis, who was the wrong kind of quiet and the wrong kind of watchful, and who I never fully trusted, even though he never did a single thing to earn my distrust until the day he did. He'd come with the Okonkwos, but he wasn't of them. Not really. He sat at the edge of their family the way a cold spot sits in a warm room. He watched people eat. That's the thing I noticed first. He watched how much each person took and how much they left. And he did it without seeming to. And I told myself I was imagining it until the day I wasn't. And there was me, 26 by then, responsible for all of it. Not because anyone elected me, but because it was my father's name on the deed and my father's grease pencil schedule on the fuel tank. And when people are frightened, they will follow the person who seems to know where the levers are, even if that person is only pretending. I did a great deal of pretending. I learned to walk the perimeter with a look on my face like I was checking something I understood, when really I was just walking, just moving, so that the movement would look like competence, and the appearance of competence would keep everyone calm one more day. My father had made all of it look effortless. I made it look effortful, which people mistook for thoroughness. That was the one lucky accident of my temperament. We had 2 gates. The main gate faced the farm road and was the one you'd expect steel, chained, locked with a padlock my father had bought in a box of 6. The second gate was on the north wall, small, meant for foot traffic to the old pump house, and my father had chained it but never locked it, because he'd told me once, a lock you have to open in a hurry is a lock that kills you. I never fully understood what he meant until the man on the radio said the exact same thing back to me, in almost the exact same words, on a night when I hadn't slept in 2 days. The radio was a ritual. Every evening at 6, after the generator came up, Rennie and I would sit in the control room, a low concrete room that had once held gauges and dials for water pressure, now mostly dead, and we'd sweep the shortwave bands looking for anyone. In the first weeks, we found plenty. Emergency broadcasts looping, the same recorded woman's voice telling us to remain in our homes and await instruction until the word stopped meaning anything and became a kind of weather. A man in what he said was Kansas reading names of the missing off a list, hour after hour, until one day he read a name and then went silent and never came back. And Rennie and I sat there for a long time afterward, wondering whose name it had been. That it could stop a man like that. 2 women who ran a kind of nightly check-in, calling out grid coordinates and asking anyone who could hear to respond. We responded once. They never answered us. Maybe they couldn't hear. Maybe they were gone by then. The bands got emptier every week, the way a party empties out near the end, until the silence between voices got so long that finding anyone at all felt like a small miracle. So when the voice came in clearer than anything had come in for weeks, clean of static, close, I leaned toward it the way you lean toward a fire. "You keep the second gate chained but not locked," he said. "That's a mistake, but it's a mistake I can work with." Rennie went stiff beside me. I remember reaching over and turning the volume down, as if lowering the sound could take back the fact that we'd heard it. "Who is this?" I said into the handset, though my thumb wasn't even on the transmit button. I said it to the room. I said it to myself. The voice didn't answer that. It said, "I'm going to tell you some things about your situation, and you're going to want to argue. But I'd ask you to just listen first, because I don't have much time on this frequency, and neither do you. Your generator runs 6 to 9 in the morning and 6 to 9 at night. You've got a well, which is why you're not dead yet. But your fuel is the real clock. And by my count, you've got maybe 5 weeks before you're pumping by hand. You've got 11 people. You had 12. But the old man who ran the place passed, didn't he? I'm sorry about that. He was careful. I respect careful. I want you to understand what it does to you, to hear a stranger recite the private arithmetic of your survival. It is a violation more intimate than being watched. It is being known. My first thought was not fear. My first thought, God help me, was relief, the relief of not being the only one who understood how thin the ice was. For weeks, I had carried the fuel math alone, waking at night to run it again in the dark. And here was a voice that already knew it, that had done the same sums. And for one terrible second, it felt like company. That relief is the hook. I know that now. He fed me the truth first, all of it accurate, so that when the lie came, I would already be leaning forward. How do you know all that? I said. And this time I pressed transmit. There was a pause. and in the pause I heard, faintly, something that sounded like a chair creaking, and something else, rhythmic and low, that I couldn't place. "Because it's my job to know," he said. "Or it was. Doesn't matter. What matters is I can help you, and I want to help you. And helping you costs me almost nothing and costs you almost nothing. There's a man walking toward you right now. He's about a day and a half out, coming up along the creek bed on the east side so he doesn't hit the road. His name is Aldous. When he gets to your north gate, I need you to open it and let him in. That's all. You let him in, and I promise you your fuel problem goes away. Your water stays clean, and you keep every one of those 11 people alive through the winter. You don't let him in, and I can't promise you anything at all." Rennie was writing something on the back of a maintenance log. He turned it toward me. It said, "Don't answer him." I don't know how he knew at 19. What took me another week to understand. Maybe the young are better at hearing the wrongness in a thing before they can explain it. He'd underlined it twice, and his hand had pressed so hard the pencil had torn the paper at the end of the second line. "Who is Aldous?" I said. "A person who needs to get somewhere," the voice said. "That's the honest answer. He needs your place as a waypoint. He'll stay a few days, and then he'll move on. And in exchange for those few days, I make sure you make it to spring. Think of it as a toll. You've got something he needs. He's got something you need. I'm just the operator connecting the call." "And what do you get?" I said. The pause again. The creak. The low rhythmic sound. "I get to sleep at night," he said. "Believe that or don't. Well, talk to your people. I'll be on this frequency tomorrow at 6:04. Don't leave the second gate locked. A lock you have to open in a hurry is a lock that kills you." And then he was gone. And the band was just static. And Rennie and I sat in the concrete room and didn't say anything for a long time. And outside, the generator coughed once and kept running. Rennie reached over eventually and turned the dial all the way down. And even then, neither of us moved to leave. Because leaving the room felt like agreeing that the thing had really happened. And as long as we sat there in the dark, it could still be something we'd misheard. I didn't tell everyone that night. That was my first real decision. And I've turned it over so many times, I've worn the edges off it. I told myself I was protecting them from panic. That was partly true. But the fuller truth is that I wanted to hold the information the way my father held information, close, doled out on my schedule. Because that was where the power was. I'd watched people crumble in the first weeks, and I'd watched them steady when someone acted like there was a plan. And I'd learned that the appearance of control is its own resource, maybe the scarcest one. So I told Marguerite because I trusted her, and I told Devlin because I needed his read on the fuel numbers, and I did not tell the Okonkwo's, and I did not tell Hollis, and I told myself I'd bring the others in when there was something to actually decide. Marguerite listened with her hands in a bowl of dried beans, sorting the good from the split, and when I finished, she didn't look up. The beans clicked against the enamel of the bowl, one after another, split ones to the left, whole ones to the right, and she never broke the rhythm the whole time I talked. "Your father used to say the well would outlast the fuel," she said. "He used to say if it ever came to a hard winter, the people who died wouldn't die of thirst. They'd die of cold and of each other." "What does that mean, of each other?" "It means," she said, and now she looked at me, "that when a group gets scared and hungry, the danger stops being outside the wall." She went back to her beans. "This man on your radio, he's not offering you fuel. He's offering you a reason to open your own gate." You should ask yourself why a person would do all that work, learning your schedule, your head count. You're dead just to give you a gift. She picked out a split bean and set it aside, and I noticed her hand wasn't shaking, which meant she'd already decided something, and the deciding had steadied her. Nobody watches a place that carefully to help it. You watch a thing that carefully because you want it or you want something in it. Devlin's red was simpler and worse. Could be real, he said. He was cleaning a wrench that didn't need cleaning, running the rag down it over and over. Guys like that, logistics guys, black market guys, they set up networks, trade routes, waypoints. It's plausible somebody's running a corridor through the county and needs safe stops. We'd be a good stop. Water, walls, off the road. He set the wrench down. It's also plausible he's telling 6 different places the same story to get 6 different gates opened. And this Aldous is the guy who opens you up from the inside once he's in. I've seen it. Not like this, but I've seen the shape of it. He looked at me. You want my vote? We don't open the gate. But it ain't my gate. That was the sentence that stayed with me. It ain't my gate. Because he was right. Whatever happened, it would be my hand on the chain. He said it without cruelty, even, almost with sympathy. And that made it worse. Because it meant he'd already thought it all the way through and landed on the fact that this was mine to carry, and he was glad it wasn't his. I didn't sleep. I walked the inside of the north wall in the dark, past the small gate, and I put my hand on the chain the way you'd touch a stove to check if it's hot. It was cold, just a chain. I thought about locking it right then, and I thought about my father saying, a lock you can't open in a hurry is a lock that kills you. And I couldn't work out which choice he'd have called the brave one and which the cowardly one. And I stood there long enough that my fingers went numb around the links. That night, I dreamed about my father, which I almost never did. In the dream, he was standing at the north gate with the chain in his hands. And he wasn't locking it, and he wasn't opening it. He was just holding it, testing the weight of it. And he said to me the thing he'd actually said to me once in life, years before, when I was a teenager complaining that he was paranoid. He'd said, I'm not afraid of the world ending, son. I'm afraid of what people talk themselves into when they think it has. I woke up before he let go of the chain, and I lay in the dark listening to 11 people breathe in the next rooms and thought about how quickly breathing can become arithmetic. The next morning, Sam Okonkwo found the footprints. He was 9 and he was bored, and he'd taken to walking the inside of the perimeter every morning like a soldier, because his father had given him that job to keep him busy and out from underfoot, and it turned out to be the most useful job any of us did. He came running into the kitchen while Marguerite was frying the last of the potatoes, and he said there were shoe marks on the outside of the north wall, in the mud by the creek, coming and going, more than one set. He was proud of the finding, the way a boy is proud of anything he's done well. And it broke something in me to see that pride, because I knew what the footprints meant, and he didn't yet. We went to look, Emmanuel and Devlin and me, and Hollis trailing behind, uninvited, which I noted. The prints were real. 2 sets at least, maybe 3. And they didn't come to the gate and stop, which is what a lone traveler seeking shelter would do. They walked to the base of the wall. They paused at the corners. At one corner, someone had crouched. You could see the deeper impression of the toes, the way the heels lifted and stayed crouched long enough that the mud had begun to fill the print with seeping creek water. Somebody had been studying our wall from the outside, measuring it, learning it. Not one lost old man named Aldous. A team. Devlin crouched beside the print and laid his own boot next to it without touching, comparing. and he didn't say anything. But his jaw worked the way it did when he was keeping a curse behind his teeth for the sake of the boy standing there. Emmanuel is a mild person, the mildest man I've ever known. And he stood looking at those prints for a long moment, and then he said, very quietly, "You know something about this." He was looking at me. "You've had a look on you for 2 days. My wife noticed it before I did. What do you know?" And that was the moment I had to decide whether I was my father's kind of leader, the kind who holds the levers close, or something else. I decided, standing in the mud, that the close holding was going to get someone killed. So I told them, all of it. The voice, the schedule, the fuel that wasn't the real offer, the generator I'd heard behind him, the man named Aldous walking up the creek, and the price that only went up. Emmanuel listened without moving. When I finished, he looked down at his son, who was standing there taking in every word. And I watched him decide not to send the boy away. And I understood the decision, because Sam had found the prints. Sam was already inside this thing, and pretending otherwise would only teach him that the adults lied when it mattered most. I gathered everyone that night, all 11 of us, in the big room, with the 2 youngest sent to the sleeping room, but Sam allowed to stay because he'd earned it, and because his parents had learned, as we all had, that keeping children ignorant of danger doesn't protect them. It just makes them face it alone later. And I laid it out plainly, and I watched the room split. And the way it split told me more about each person than a year of ordinary living would have. Devlin wanted the gate locked, welded shut if possible, and a watch posted, and he wanted it done that night. Fear made him decisive, and his decisiveness was the kind that narrows, that wants walls higher and doors fewer. "You don't leave a door unlocked when you know a man's coming for it," he said. I don't care what philosophy the old man had. Philosophy's for people who aren't being watched. Marguerite agreed about the gate, but not the welding. "A lock you can't open in a hurry," she started, and I finished it with her. And Devlin looked at us both like we were speaking a private language, which I suppose we were. "You weld that gate," she said, "and the day there's a fire in the pump house, or the day one of us has to run for the well in the dark, that weld is a wall between us and living. Lock it if you must, but don't take away our own way out. A trap works both ways. It always works both ways." Rennie thought we should keep talking to the man, not to obey him. Rennie didn't trust him. He distrusted him from the first minute. But because as long as the man was talking, we were learning. And the day he stopped talking was the day the talking had become unnecessary to him, which meant the day something worse was coming. "Information's a resource too," Rennie said. And I saw my father in a 19-year-old I'd known for 6 weeks. And it unsettled me. Right now he thinks he's the one studying us. Every time he opens his mouth, he tells us something. That generator you heard, the way he keeps a schedule, those are cracks. You don't seal up a well you're still drawing water from. Priya asked the question none of us had let ourselves ask out loud. What does he want with a person? She had her arm around Sam, and her voice was level in the way that costs a person everything to keep level. He said this Aldous needs people, not shelter people. What does a man do with people that he has to trick his way into a place to get them? Nobody answered her. The not answering was its own answer, and the room got very quiet. And outside the wind moved through the dead pump house and made a sound like breathing. And Hollis, Priya's brother, the wrong kind of quiet. Hollis said something that changed the shape of the whole thing. He said, "Maybe we're thinking about this backwards. Maybe the smart move isn't to keep everybody out. Maybe it's to find out who's worth the trade." The room turned to look at him. "He's offering to keep all of us alive through the winter," Hollis went on. And he wasn't looking at any of us. He was looking at a spot on the wall. In exchange for one person coming in. That's the deal on the table. But deals go both ways. What if the real deal is one person going out? What if the winter's not survivable with 11 and it is survivable with, say, 8? Then a man offering to solve your fuel problem by taking a few mouths off your hands isn't a threat. He's a mercy. Emmanuel stood up. He didn't shout. He just stood and put himself slightly between Hollis and his children and said, "Say the number, Hollis. If you're doing arithmetic on my kids, say the number out loud in front of them and see how it sounds." Hollis didn't say the number. He put up his hands and said he was just thinking out loud, just running scenarios. And the moment passed. But it didn't really pass, because everyone in that room had now heard the unspeakable thing spoken. And once a thing is spoken, it can be spoken again. And each time it costs less. Marguerite had been right. The danger had stopped being outside the wall. I watched Priya's hand tighten on her son's shoulder until the knuckles paled. And I watched her not look at her brother. And I understood that there was a history in that family I'd never see the bottom of. And that Hollis had been running arithmetic on people long before the world gave him permission. I posted the watch. Rennie and I took the first, on the north wall, in the cold, with the generator off to save fuel, so the dark was total except for the stars, which were more stars than any of us had seen before the grid died. A whole spilled sky that felt like an insult, that much beauty over that much fear. We didn't talk much. Around midnight, Rennie said out of nothing, "My sister was supposed to meet me at our cousin's place. That's the message I'm waiting on. On the phone." He didn't look at me when he said it. I know it's not coming. I keep the phone charged anyway. It's stupid. I told him it wasn't stupid, and I meant it, because I understood then that the phone was the same thing as my father's grease pencil schedule, and Marguerite's onions, a small ritual against a large dark. A way of insisting that the person you'd been still existed inside the person you'd had to become. Aldous came the next night, and he came exactly the way the voice had said he would, up the creek bed on the east side, slow, an old man's gait. We saw him from a long way off because Rennie had rigged a trip line with cans on it along the creek approach. Devlin's idea executed with Rennie's patience, and when the cans rattled, we were already awake and already at the wall. It was a small sound, that rattle, thin in the cold air, but it went through the whole compound. And by the time I reached the north wall, half the household was awake and moving in the dark, and I had to hiss at them to stay back, stay low, because the worst thing we could do was show him our numbers and our fear all at once. He stopped at the north gate. He didn't try it. He didn't call out. He just stood on the other side of the chain, an old man in a long coat with a canvas bag over one shoulder. And he waited, the way a person waits at a door they've been told will open. And after a while, when it didn't open, he sat down in the mud with his back against the gatepost on the outside, like he had all the time in the world. And I understood that this was a tactic, that his patience was a kind of pressure, that an old man freezing at your gate is a much harder thing to leave out in the cold than an armed stranger demanding entry. He was still there at dawn. He was still there when the generator came up at 6 and its rhythm carried faintly through the walls, and I saw him lift his head at the sound of it, the way a dog lifts its head at a familiar step. He knew that generator. He'd been told about that generator. Everything about him said he'd been briefed on us in detail, that he was not a lost man, but a placed one. Marguerite came to stand beside me at the observation slit, and she watched him a long while, and she said, "He's not shivering." I hadn't noticed until she said it. A man who'd truly been out all night in that cold would be shivering, would be stamping his feet, would be doing all the small, desperate things a body does to keep its heat. He was doing none of them. He was sitting still and patient and warm, which meant he'd slept somewhere warm, and come to our gate fresh to perform the part of the freezing traveler. He's an actor, Marguerite said, and he's been given his stage directions. Don't feed him his lines. I went to the gate alone, against Devlin's furious advice, with the chain still between us, and I looked at him through the bars. He was older than I'd expected, 70, maybe more. His hands, resting on his knees, were an old man's hands, spotted and knuckled, and one of them shook, a fine, constant tremor. His face was kind. That's the thing I wasn't ready for. He had a genuinely kind face, tired and creased and kind, the face of a grandfather. And when he saw me, his eyes filled up, actually filled with water. And he said, "Oh, thank God there's someone. I've been walking for so long." And every instinct I had wanted to open the gate. That is the truth, and I won't dress it up. Every human instinct in me, the instinct that makes us people and not animals, screamed at me to unchain the gate and bring the freezing old man in by the fire and give him soup and let him rest. And it took everything my father had ever taught me about the difference between kindness and the performance of vulnerability to keep my hand off that chain. I kept Marguerite's words running behind my eyes. He's not shivering. He's not shivering. And I held onto them like a rail on a stair in the dark. "Who's the man on the radio?" I said. The tears stopped. Not slowly. They stopped the way a faucet stops, all at once. And his kind face didn't drop the kindness exactly, but it changed underneath the kindness. And I understood I was looking at something I did not have the experience to understand. A person who could produce grief the way Marguerite could produce onions, on demand, as a tool. "You've been talking to him," Aldous said. And his voice had lost the tremor his hand still carried. "Good. Then you know I'm expected. I know a voice on a radio told me to open a gate. I don't know anything else. Tell me who he is and what you want, and maybe we talk." Aldous looked at me for a long moment. And then he did something that frightened me more than anything the voice had said. He smiled warmly, and he said, "You have a girl inside. 6 years old, Ada, and a boy, Sam, who walks your wall every morning at first light. He's a careful boy. He'd be very good at what we do. And there's a young man, Rennie, who charges a dead phone every day, which tells me he's got hope in him still. And hope is the most useful thing a person can have. Hope makes people reliable." He was reciting them. He was reciting my people to me the way the voice had recited our fuel and our headcount. And I realized with a cold that went all the way to the bone that he wasn't here to take shelter, and he wasn't here to open us up for a raid. He was here to choose. He was a recruiter, or a buyer, or something with no clean word for it. The voice on the radio ran a network, and the network needed people. And this old man with the kind face and the fake tears was how they picked them. "You don't need my gate open," I said. "You need me to hand you a person." "I need you to make a choice," Aldous said gently. "The man on the radio wasn't lying to you, not really. He can keep all of you alive through the winter. He has fuel, he has roots, he has a whole arrangement, and he shares it, in exchange for the only thing that's actually scarce now. Which isn't fuel or food or water. It's people, willing hands. He'll take one from you, one you choose, or one who chooses to come, and in exchange you all live. It's the oldest arrangement in the world, young man. A tithe. You've just forgotten it's normal, because you lived your whole life in a soft time. when nobody had to pay it. He rose slowly. An old man's rise, joints and effort. I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after. I'm very patient. And every day you wait, someone inside those walls gets a little colder and a little hungrier and a little more willing to do arithmetic. I don't have to open your gate, son. Your own people will open it for me. They always do. He walked back down toward the creek, unhurried, and I stood at the chain with my heart going like the generator. And I understood that the siege had never been about the wall. The wall was thick enough to stop men. It was never built to stop an idea. And an idea was exactly what he'd walked up the creek bed to deliver. And he'd delivered it. And now it was inside with us, and no chain in my father's box of 6 could lock it back out. I want to be honest about what the next days did to us, because the honest version is worse than any version with monsters in it. Nobody attacked us. That was the genius of it. Aldous simply stayed, sometimes visible by the creek, sometimes not, always there by dawn. An old man patiently waiting to be handed a life. He'd raise a hand to Sam when the boy walked the wall in the mornings, a friendly grandfather's wave, and it took everything in Emmanuel not to go over the wall at him. And instead, Emmanuel simply changed the boy's route, so Sam walked the south wall now, away from the creek, and never explained why. And Sam, who was 9 and not stupid, stopped asking after the second day. And the voice came on the radio each night at 6:04. No longer threatening, now almost fatherly, describing the winter that was coming with the specificity of a man who'd seen it. The cold snaps in the second and third week of what would have been January. The way the wellhead could freeze if we didn't keep it insulated, and we didn't have the materials to insulate it. The exact point at which our fuel would run out, and we'd be pumping water by a hand crank in weather that would take the skin off our palms. And every night he reminded us, kindly, that all of it went away for the small price of one person. He never said who. He never had to. He let us do that to ourselves. I stopped letting the group listen after the third night, because I could see what it was doing. It wasn't information anymore. It was erosion. Each night the voice put a number in the air, a date the cold would come, a week the fuel would fail. And each number was a small stone dropped into water. And the ripples reached every person in the room and set them, silently, to counting. I'd watch Devlin's lips move. I'd watch Hollis go very still and attentive, the way a man goes still when someone is confirming a thing he already believes. So I took the radio duty myself, alone, and I told them I'd report anything that mattered, and I became the thing I'd sworn in the mud. I wouldn't become the one who holds the levers close, because I'd learned that some information isn't a resource, it's a poison. And the kind thing is to drink it yourself so no one else has to. Devlin cracked first, and I don't fully blame him. He came to me on the 5th day, and he wouldn't meet my eyes, and he said, "Hollis isn't wrong." That's how he opened it. About the math. I ran it every way I know how. 11 people, 5 weeks of fuel, a hand pump, no resupply. We don't all make it to Springcade. Some of us die in the cold. That's not the man on the radio talking. That's the fuel gauge talking. And the fuel gauge doesn't lie. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed and old. So if some of us are going to die anyway, and there's a version where one person leaves and the rest of us live, I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying you should say out loud why it's wrong, because I've been trying to, and I can't find the words anymore. And that scares me more than the old man does. And I couldn't find the words either. Not clean ones, not fast ones. I stood there in the cold pump house with the man who'd fixed our generator 4 times, who'd crouched 2 hours in the freezing dark to keep us alive. And I understood that he wasn't a bad man, that he was, in fact, one of the best of us, and that the arithmetic was working on him precisely because he was the kind of man who'd feel responsible for every person who froze. That was the cruelty of the thing. It didn't come for the weak or the wicked first. It came for the responsible. It found the people who cared most about keeping everyone alive. And it whispered to them that caring about everyone meant sacrificing someone. I said the true thing, which was that the moment we handed a person over to buy our own winter, we'd have already lost the winter. Because we'd have become the kind of people who could do that. And that kind of people don't survive together. They just take turns being the one who gets traded next. Hollis was arithmetic with a smile. Aldous was arithmetic with tears. The voice was arithmetic with a fatherly tone. But it was all the same equation. And the equation only had one real answer, which was that once you agree, the group can spend a member to save itself. No member is ever safe again. And the trust that actually keeps people alive. In a hard winter, the trust that makes you share your last fuel and take the cold watch and give your portion to a child, the trust is gone. And you all freeze anyway, just meaner. I said it badly, but I said it. And Devlin listened, and he nodded slowly. And he said, okay. Then somebody's got to make the old man leave. Because as long as he sits there, he's an offer. And an offer sitting outside your gate for a month is going to get taken. You can't outweight a patient man with a rifle you've never fired and a hungry group behind you. You have to change the situation. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, I fixed that generator 4 times because I needed to believe I could keep everybody alive by being good with my hands. This isn't a hands problem. I don't know what to do with a problem my hands can't reach. And I saw that his cracking hadn't been weakness at all. It had been the honest grief of a competent man discovering the limit of his competence. And that is a thing that breaks better men than Devlin. He was right about the situation, though. That was the thing I'd been avoiding. We could not simply refuse and wait, because refusing and waiting was exactly the ground the voice had chosen to fight on. The ground where hunger and cold and Hollis's whispering did his work for him. Every day we waited. The old man's presence and the voice's numbers ate another inch of the floor beneath us. We had to change the situation. And the only way to change the situation was to stop being the people the voice thought we were. That night, Hollis went to the gate. Sam saw it from the south wall and came and woke me. And I got there in time to see Hollis standing at the north gate in the dark with his hand on the chain, and Aldous on the other side, close, the two of them talking low. And I heard the tale of it before Hollis heard me coming. I heard Hollis say, not the kids, obviously, but there's a man here, older, drinks, keeps to himself, nobody'd miss. And I understood he was offering Devlin, was standing at my gate in the dark, selling the man who'd kept us all alive. And something went very cold and very clear in me. I didn't shout. Emmanuel had taught me, without meaning to, the power of not shouting. I just said Hollis's name once, and he turned, and his hand came off the chain, and Aldous, on the other side, smiled that grandfather's smile and said, there you see, your own people. It's always your own people. And drifted back toward the creek, satisfied, because whatever happened now, the poison was proven. The gate had been touched from the inside, and he'd wanted me to see it. I didn't do anything to Hollis. That surprised everyone, including me. Devlin wanted him put out, over the wall, and Devlin had the most right to want it, since it was his life Hollis had been pricing, But I'd understood something watching Aldous drift away satisfied. If I put Hollis over the wall, I'd have done the arithmetic myself, spent a person to make the group safer, and the old man would have won without ever setting foot inside. So I didn't. I sat Hollis down in front of everyone, and I made him say what he'd said at the gate, out loud, the way Emmanuel had made him almost say the number that first night. And this time, he had no scenario to hide behind. And he wept, actually wept. And he said the thing that was under all of it, which was that he was terrified. That he'd been terrified since before any of this. That he'd spent his whole life certain he'd be the one abandoned when things got hard. And so he'd decided, long ago, to be the one who did the abandoning first. Priya went to him then. Her hand found his shoulder, the same hand that had gone white gripping her son. And she didn't forgive him exactly, but she didn't let go either. And I saw the shape of the family history close over the moment, like water over a stone. It was the closest thing to a weapon we had, that a frightened man could be sat down and heard instead of thrown out, because it was the one move the voice's whole method never accounted for. I'd been listening to that voice for over a week, and in all that listening, I'd learned two things he didn't know I'd learned. The first was the generator behind him, its rhythm, which I'd heard 3 separate times before he learned to cut it, and which was a 2-stroke, a small one, the kind you'd carry, not a big diesel like ours, which meant his fuel supply wasn't the endless corridor he claimed. It was a man with a portable generator and a canister and a range. Devlin confirmed it when I described the sound. He closed his eyes and listened to my imitation of it and said, "That's a 2-stroke and a tired one. Big network with fuel routes doesn't run a tired little 2-stroke to reach one gate. That's a man rationing." The second thing was subtler. Every night at 6:04, he was there, precisely. And precision like that isn't power. Precision like that is fear. A man who can talk to you any time doesn't need a fixed appointment. A man who keeps a fixed appointment to the minute is a man on a schedule as tight as ours. A man who has his own generator window, his own fuel clock, his own small, desperate arithmetic. He'd been reading our fear back to us for a week. He'd never once let us hear his. So on the 9th night I got on the radio at 6:04, and before he could speak, I spoke. "Your generator's a 2-stroke, I said. You cut it every time now, but I heard it 3 times before you got careful. That's not a corridor. That's not a network with fuel routes. That's one man or a small crew with a portable and a can. You've got a range and a fuel clock, same as us, and you're spending it sitting on this frequency at the exact same minute every night, which means your window is as tight as mine. You're not offering us salvation. You're fishing because you're running low too. And a well and a big diesel and 11 pairs of hands is exactly the kind of prize a man in your situation needs. You didn't come to save us. You came because you're the one who won't make it to spring alone." The static hung there. For the first time, 6:04 came and went into 6:05 and into 6:06 with no fatherly voice filling it. And in that silence, I could hear the whole group behind me in the control room. All of them. Because they'd all come to listen, even the children, even Hollis. And the silence stretched until it stopped being his weapon and became mine. I'd taken his own instrument, the loaded pause, the patient quiet, and turned it around. And I could feel the room understand that turning, could feel 11 people lean into the silence with me instead of against me. When he finally spoke, his voice was old. Not performed old like Aldous' fake tears, actually old and tired and stripped of the fatherly music. "Aldous is my brother," he said, and that I had not expected. He's got maybe a year of his mind left in him. And I've been trying to get us both somewhere with walls and water and people before it goes. Because a man losing his mind can't survive alone, and neither can I. Not out here, not through another winter. Everything I told you about the cold was true. Everything I told you about your fuel was true. The only lie was the part where taking one of yours was for your benefit instead of mine. A long breath, crackling on the line. I've done this at 4 other places. It worked at 2. You want to know what happened at the 2 where it worked? They opened the gate, and they gave us a person, a real person, a young one, strong, and we took him, and we moved on. And I've thought about those 2 people every single night since, because I traded them for my brother's comfort, and I told myself a story about corridors and networks, so I wouldn't have to hear what I actually was. The static swelled and ebbed. You're the first one to look at me and see a scared old man with a portable generator instead of a devil. I don't know if that makes you smart or just lucky, but I'm not going to sit outside your gate and watch you turn into me. Aldous. And here his voice went off the mic, calling, and came back. I'm calling him in. We'll be gone by morning. Keep your wellhead wrapped. Burlap and straw will do it if you pack it tight. I mean that. I've got no reason to lie to you now. And the frequency went dead. And this time, it stayed dead. That night, and every night after. And at dawn, the old man by the north gate was gone. And the creek bed held 2 sets of footprints walking away, one steady and one shuffling. The strong brother and the failing one, going off to try their arithmetic on someone else. Or maybe, I let myself hope, to stop. Sam came and reported the empty creek bed, with the same soldier's seriousness he brought to everything. And when he said they're gone, the whole compound seemed to exhale at once. And Marguerite went and fried onions, even though no one was scared anymore. Or maybe because for the first time in 9 days, she could afford to be, now that being scared wouldn't cost anyone their life. We wrapped the wellhead in burlap and straw, packed tight, and it held through January. Devlin supervised the packing personally, on his knees in the frost. And when it was done, he stayed there a moment longer than the work required, and I understood he was making his peace with a thing he'd nearly let happen. And I left him to it. The cold came exactly when the voice had said it would, the 2nd and 3rd week. And it took the skin off our palms exactly as promised when the fuel finally ran out, and we went to the hand crank. And it was every bit as hard as he'd told us it would be. But we did it together, in shifts, the whole household, even the children hauling burlap, even Hollis, especially Hollis, who took the worst watches without being asked, the way a man does penance when words won't carry it. Nobody was traded. Nobody was spent. We were colder and hungrier and thinner by spring than any of us had ever been. But we were still 11. And we were still the kind of people who were still 11. And that turned out to be the only kind of people who make it through a winter like that one. But I told you at the start that I wanted to be accurate. And accuracy means I can't stop at the clean ending, because there's a thing that happened after that I've never told anyone. And it's the real reason I'm telling any of this at all. 3 nights after the brothers left, I couldn't sleep. And I went to the control room and turned on the shortwave out of habit, sweeping the dead bands. And at 6:04, my own generator's window now, not his, I heard a voice. Not the old man, a different one, younger. And it said, clear and clean through the static, the way the first voice had come in that first night. You keep the 2nd gate chained but not locked. That's a mistake, but it's a mistake I can work with. The exact words the old man had used. which meant the old man hadn't invented them, which meant it wasn't a man and his failing brother improvising their way across a broken county. It was a method, a script, something being run deliberately at scale by more than one voice on more than one frequency at places all across the dark, all of them being told the same story about fuel and winter and the small price of one person, all of them being sat outside their own gates by a patient stranger with a kind face and rehearsed tears. The old man told me the truth about his brother. I believe that. But the truth about his brother was just one more layer of the thing, a human layer wrapped around a mechanism. And the mechanism was still out there, and it was still running. And somewhere that night, another exhausted person of my age was leaning toward a radio the way you lean toward a fire, feeling that first fatal wash of relief at being known. I sat there in the concrete dark and thought about how the old man had learned the script and who had taught it to him, and how many mouths had spoken those same first words into how many nights, and whether any of the people who'd taught it even remembered anymore that it was a lie, or whether they'd said it so many times it had become, for them, simply the way the world worked now. I didn't answer the new voice. I turned off the radio. And then I did the thing I should have done the very first night. The thing my father, I think, would have understood, though I broke his own rule to do it. I went out to the north gate in the dark, and I took the padlock from the box of 6, and I locked it. A lock I can't open in a hurry. A lock that might, someday, kill me. I decided I'd rather die of my own patience than live by someone else's arithmetic. And every night now, at 6:04, when my generator comes up and its rhythm carries out over the walls to whatever's listening, I do not turn on the radio. I've learned that the most dangerous voice in a dying world is not the one that threatens you. It's the one that tells you the truth about your fear, and then offers to sell you back your own safety, one person at a time, until there's no one left inside the wall but the person holding the chain. My father told me he wasn't afraid of the world ending. He was afraid of what people talk themselves into when they think it has. I used to think that was a warning about other people, about the raiders, the desperate, the men who'd come over the wall. It took a voice on a radio and an old man with a kind face to teach me he'd meant something closer to home. He'd meant the arithmetic. He'd meant the small, reasonable voice inside your own walls, inside your own head. The one that starts by counting the fuel and ends by counting the people. The one that always has a number ready and always makes the number sound like mercy. That's the thing the walls were never built to stop. That's the thing you have to lock the gate against, knowing the lock is on the inside, knowing you're really locking it against yourself. We made it to spring, all 11 of us. The creek came up with a thaw, and the well ran clean, and Marguerite planted her seed packets in the mud along the south wall, and Ada finally stopped asking whether her school was still standing, not because anyone answered her, but because she'd found new questions, spring questions, the kind children ask when they've decided, without being told, that there's going to be a future to be curious about. And Rennie still charges his phone. It's still dead. He knows it's dead. But I've stopped thinking of it as stupid, because I understand now that it's the same gesture as my locked gate and Marguerite's onions, a way of insisting that the person you were is still allowed to exist inside the person you had to become. The phone says, I still expect to hear from someone I love. The lock says, I will not be talked into trading a person for a season. They're the same prayer, said with different hands. Sometimes, late, I still go to the control room and put my hand on the radio dial without turning it. I don't know why. Maybe to prove I can leave it off. Maybe because some part of me wants to warn the others out there in the dark. The exhausted ones leaning toward the fire wants to key the mic and say, don't listen. It's a script. The fuel is real, but the mercy is a lie. Count your people, but never spend them. But I don't key the mic. Because the moment I start broadcasting into the dark at 6:04 every night, precise, patient, offering strangers the truth about their fear, I've become a voice on a radio too. And there's no way to be sure, from the other side of the static, that my kind of voice is different from his. So I keep my silence, and I keep my gate locked, and I keep my 11. And I let that be the whole of what I say to the dark. Nothing at all, and a chain I chose, and a winter we spent without spending each other. That's the accurate version. That's all of it, in the order it happened. My father would have found the words faster and locked the gate sooner and maybe never heard the voice at all, because he'd have known not to sweep the bands in the first place, known that the surest way to keep a thing out is to never lean toward it. But he's gone, and I'm the one whose name is on the deed, and the one whose hand is on the chain. And I've made my peace with being slower and clumsier than he was, because in the end, I got to the same place he'd have gotten to. 11 people, a locked gate, a radio I don't turn on, and the quiet, hard, unglamorous knowledge that the offer to save everyone, if it comes from a stranger who already knows the number of your dead, was never an offer at all. It was only ever the first line of a script, spoken kindly into the dark at 4 minutes past 6.